That's the other thing that I think languages gave me, and when we're thinking about leadership, is you learn that there's no such thing as the ultimate truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to overcome it.
What did you learn about leadership from being in the army?
Okay, the first thing is that there is a leader in all of us. But this debate about nature or nurture.
For yourself coming out of the army, you then spent probably one of the most unusual career pivots I've ever seen, actually. But you then spent a year working with Jackie Stewart in Formula One.
Yes.
What did a day in the life of that job look like?
Oh God, I couldn't tell you what a day in the life looked like because it was so different.
I know a few years ago, you had quite a disruption in your own personal life. The world was kind of going through COVID, but you were going through something a bit more serious than that personally. Yeah. What was going on at that time for you? Andy Foster, a seasoned expert with 30 years of international experience in partnering with senior technology executives and their teams to develop effective leadership and organizational impact. Andy specializes in tackling the unique leadership challenges faced by IT leaders, offering valuable support, advice, and challenges. Currently a principal at Clarity Partners, his impressive track record includes roles at notable organizations such as Stewart Grand Prix, Bulletin International, Sutherland Consulting, Deloitte, and CIO Development. Andy's diverse experience equips him to empower leaders, helping them to unlock their full potential and navigate the complexities of today's business landscape. Okay, great. So, Andy, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Anton. Great to be here.
For what is obviously the Christmas special.
Yes,
Tales of Tech Titans. And I guess in the honour of being the Christmas special, we are doing a slightly special episode. You're not strictly speaking a Titan in the world of tech anyway, but you are the man behind the scenes that helps to create the Titans and the teams and the missions that they're trying to achieve. So there's a ton for us to talk through today, and I'm really interested to learn about your experiences as you work with tech leaders. But I'd also like to start off with a little walk down memory lane for you.
Sure.
And understand a bit more where you came from and kind of how you've arrived at this point. And I know that the foundations of your working career were as an officer in the British Army.
That's right.
Sort of mid-80s through to late 90s.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time. Certainly my memory of that time, you had a lot going on with the IRA.
Yes.
You would have had the Gulf War during that time. You had the Falklands just prior to it as well.
That's
so
right.
It was a fairly active time for the British Army. So I was interested what inspired you to go into the forces.
Well, my dad had been in for a short period and then stayed in the Territorial Army, and so I was always aware of the military a bit more than most people. Because back in the day, people weren't quite so aware of the British Army. But anyway, what got me to join in the end was the opportunity to travel. I'm a linguist. I speak 3 or 4 languages, and I'd already, some of them I learned subsequently, but I had the travel bug, and I just loved experiencing other cultures. So I thought the opportunity to travel the world was a great one, and I just like the idea of leadership.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what that meant, but leading people appealed.
Yeah, interesting. I had no idea you were a linguist. How many languages do you? So 3 or 4?
So
Which
I speak
ones?
French, German, Spanish,
and
then we'll come to it in a minute. A bit of Serbo-Croat and a bit of Arab, enough to get you through a checkpoint.
Yeah, wow. How did you develop those languages? How did you learn them?
I was just good at school at French and then German.
Yeah.
And actually, the Spanish was the Army later on sent me on something called the Army language scholarship scheme, which involved living in Toledo for a year.
Yeah, wow.
Attached to the Spanish Army, and so literally I had 2 weeks immersion training in a business in a language school in Cambridge, and then just sent out and kind of knocked on the front gate in Toledo and said, I'm the English exchange officer, and then I kind of could hardly speak really after 2 weeks, and then I just learned through immersion. It's the best way to learn.
Well, it's interesting to say that because I read something recently, and it was looking at I think polyglots, the word, isn't it, for people that can speak multiple languages?
Yeah, I think that's the word.
That's the word. But how do they acquire languages, and how do they so quickly? And it was actually through immersing yourself and speaking in the language in the natural environment. Because what they were kind of saying is if you're in a foreign country and you're speaking the language and you say something wrong, someone will correct you. They don't expect you to be fluent, right?
That's right.
So they'll nicely correct you, and you learn through that kind of constant feedback.
Yes.
Whereas if you're kind of learning in a classroom, you're not getting that same kind of instant feedback, or the same requirement to think on your feet, to listen, and kind of practice all the skills. So
totally,
it's interesting what you just said, because that's kind of the theory. You want to learn language, go and spend time speaking it.
Yeah, and I think that the second and third language is easier than the first.
Correct.
Because particularly if you're English, you don't know what a subjunctive is until you've mastered it in French, and then it's easy in German and Spanish, because you get that there's no such thing as a direct translation.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I think languages gave me, and when we're thinking about leadership, is you learn that there's no such thing as the ultimate truth. If you think about the French word "qu'est-ce que c'est que ça," if you translate that, it's what is it that is.
Yeah.
And just doesn't work. Whereas so you just have to take it as it comes. And the other thing that I find interesting is a language is a little kind of shines a little torch onto the culture.
Yeah.
So think about English breakfast. We break our fast. We eat in order to live. The French, le petit déjeuner.
Yeah.
They live to eat.
Yeah.
German, Frühstück.
Yeah.
The early piece, without stereotyping Germans. But that's very, very functional.
Yeah.
Desayuno is Spanish, and that's that evokes that's an Arab word from way back when during the Moorish occupation of Spain. So just little things like that, I think help you take different perspectives.
It's interesting. Yeah, look, I think language is important. I think the semantics, the meaning, and obviously we're talking today a lot about leadership, but the words of a leader, I think they resonate very loud and can mean a lot. And I think you have to be very careful with the words that you use, because it can mean different things to different people.
Absolutely.
In that translation. Let's go back to the army. So so through that time, you would have spent some time actually serving in conflict as well, which I'm sure is like an intense pressure cooker environment. What did that teach you about yourself?
Okay, well, the first thing I'd say is somebody once said, and they're totally right, going on operations in the military is 80% boredom.
Right.
15% excitement and 5% sheer terror.
Yeah.
And that's probably about right. Probably not. There wasn't that much terror. There were squeaky moments.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of it is mundane, just waiting for something to happen. I think it was the guys who went subsequently after me went to Afghanistan. They might tell that slightly differently.
Yeah.
But what did I learn? I think I remember going to Northern Ireland. The first thing. The fear I had was not what was going to happen. Who was it who said the only thing we should fear is fear itself? Is arriving out there in theatre and going, am I going to be up to it when it happens, if it happens? And it probably was. And it did. And I was.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it happened to, it wasn't just me that it happened to, and we were all up to it. But that feeling of, yes, okay, I was able to, when I went into that place, I was able to cope. It gave you a kind of ticket to play in your at the very beginning of your profession.
Yeah, interesting. That's I guess early imposter syndrome. Yeah. For want of a better word, right? That kind of know when the rubber hits the road, can I do this?
Yeah. What's the other quote? Overcoming. I can't remember it now. It'll come to me in a moment.
Yeah.
But it's about courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to overcome it.
Yeah. Okay.
If you don't have any fear, then like they say, never share a foxhole with a brave man. Right. Actually, fear is quite an important part of it.
Yeah, it's huge. Actually, it's funny. I was reading a book just this week about. I think the story was, the guy that these people that do the rock climbing without the ropes and all this kind of stuff. God,
terrifies me.
And this one guy, I forget there's a Netflix show on it, but the MRI showed that his amygdala in his brain didn't function, so he didn't feel fear. Otherwise, you just wouldn't do this stuff.
No, you wouldn't.
But fear actually is a protective sense, critical kind of human emotion.
But it's really funny when you're in we're probably digressing a bit, but when you're in those moments. I remember being so busy, getting the helicopter over above and getting the dog in and getting the scenes of crime officers on the spot and everything. I completely forgot to be afraid because I was too busy to be afraid. Actually, it was only afterwards I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested. I had a guest on recently who was in the police. and he went into the police kind of out of school and so forth. And we were talking about when you adopt an identity, when you put on a uniform, and you had this kind of stereotype of that. And so I was interested, when you became a soldier and you put on the uniform in those situations, did you feel a different identity, a different personality?
That says something to the culture. It was a very, very strong culture, and so. But one of the key precepts in the military was authenticity.
Yeah.
So it's not like you became a different person, but you were part of a particularly when you were wearing a uniform and you were representing, back then, Her Majesty.
Yeah.
I suppose you carried yourself in a certain way, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you were always encouraged to be you.
Yeah.
Within that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I think it's that. I think about, remember that old TV show, Mr. Ben? And you kind of go in and come out in the different uniforms and different costumes, and it does kind of determine or dictate to a certain degree the way that we behave, because it comes with an expectation, the uniform that we wear, right?
Absolutely. It's like when you put on a jacket and a nice shirt compared to a t-shirt and thongs. You carry yourself differently.
That's right. Yeah, you exactly do. You mentioned early on about the going into the forces and about leadership, and kind of curiosity around leadership. What did you learn about leadership from being in the army?
Okay. The first thing is that there is a leader in all of us. But this debate about nature or nurture. I remember having a conversation, quite it sticks with me, and was maybe a seminal conversation in my life. Very, very. There was a sergeant major, so very, very senior soldier, and he said to me, "Sir, if I hadn't been in the army, I'd be in prison now,
right,
with my father and my brother." And there was something about the fact that from the same environment, whatever that might have been, two of them ended up in prison, and this person ended up, because he was in an environment that encouraged leadership and supported when people occasionally went wrong, had got to the point where he was one of the most senior soldiers in the battalion.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's that's one thing.
Yeah, do you think that comes with the expectations? Do you think of what it means? It's very defined what it means to be in the army. Do you think?
There's something about the standards, because we talk about standards outside the military, but in the military they really are adhered to, because the consequences of not adhering to them are too great, and therefore it's just bedded into the culture. And therefore there are standards relating to life and death, but there are all the standards that sit around it, because the culture has to be, we set standards and we meet them.
Yeah.
And so that allows people to kind of grow.
Yeah.
And yes, there's an expectation, but there's also very deliberate, to use civilian language, talent development.
Yeah.
And very careful identification and management of talent. So this person would have been spotted very early on for having a spark, and then brought on, not given favoritism, but given the opportunities and given the development.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
That was a big one. The other ones would be when the proverbial hits the fan, the way you deal with it is a result not so much of what happens in that moment, but what you did leading up to that moment. How you set the culture, what your processes and drills were. So, but there's something around kind of being prepared.
Yeah. Okay.
And doing the hard work before it happened.
Yeah. Okay.
I talked about authenticity, and then I think the we were talking about this earlier on, but the one that I still use it and it resonates with execs today, which is no plans avoids contact with the enemy. Yeah. You can't not have a plan, but you have to create your plan. If you create your plan with the expectation that it's not going to actually follow the way that you expect it to, from a very young age, we were all encouraged to be flexible and to and to kind of morph with what actually happened.
Yeah, interesting. I've actually been I brought it with me I've been reading this book, Feel Good Productivity. coincidentally, I picked it up on Monday, and I was actually interested. I got to the 3rd chapter, and it's called Clarity, which I thought was ironic, given that's the name of your business. But that chapter specifically talks about the military. And I thought this seems a bit of a strange coming together of circumstances. But what I found interesting, it talked about clarity, and the example it gave from the military was it said that the commander, the commander's perspective for every mission has to be about the purpose, the kind of end state, and the key task to be achieved. But the general in that mission, they fundamentally need to make sure they've communicated the purpose, because when the plan goes astray and things go wrong, as long as the troops know what the purpose is, they can reconfigure and kind of come together towards the end.
Yeah. We had this concept which was actually what made the German army so successful. Yep. People think of the German, again, not stereotyping in terms of being very structured, but they were the most amazing warfighters in the Second World War.
Yep.
Blitzkrieg was all about coordination, so that was one thing, very, very carefully coordinated all-arms warfare. But they also had this doctrine called Auftragstaktik, which we translate as mission command. And so what we would say whenever we gave the orders out was we told right down to the most junior soldier would say what the higher commander's intention was 2 levels above that person. So if you saw an opportunity to go and do it, you did. And that was another great thing about the military, which I've never really seen since, which is pushing responsibility down to the lowest possible level.
That's right.
Because you'd be surprised. It's just amazing.
And I think this is what this book was talking about from a military example. And I think the example it gave was the D-Day landings, actually. And saying, and I don't know enough about this, so I'm taking it on face value from the story in the book, but the parachute regiment that kind of came in first before the troops landed on the beach actually landed in the wrong towns. But they still understood the purpose of the mission. So they're able to adapt, still secure those locations and enable things to happen. But it was down to giving the power to the troops to understand the purpose and then refigure out what the plan needed to be and the actual task to accomplish it. Which again, as you say, how much of that does get translated into businesses? I don't think we see enough.
No, and you just got me thinking like that. It was well known when we were doing our training. Goose Green, when the Paras were in the Falklands, for those who don't know, that was an 8-hour battle. And for most of that time, the only thing that a soldier was aware of was the soldier his mate next to him. That was it. And so, if you didn't know, what the ultimate objective was, then you were just in the dark. You couldn't wait to be told what to do.
That's right.
And sometimes you didn't know what direction you were facing, and so on. I've lost my thread. What was?
No, that's good. I was just interested, and I was going to come to it later, and I probably will come back to the stuff there about clarity. But it was just interesting listening to you talk there about understanding the mission, the purpose, the why, and the importance. And I guess that's what you took as your lesson from leadership in the army.
So, and your question was about people knowing what was expected of them, and is that the same in business? That was I find. It's just so often, even in IT leadership teams and exec teams, where you might hear the boss saying, so and so doesn't understand, doesn't get it. What don't they get? Have you told them? Well, no, but they should. Well, they got a job description, and you have an expectation of them. Great, but have you conveyed that expectation to them, or have you just made an assumption that they know what you're thinking?
Or 9 times out of 10, why? The why. I kind of like you look at kind of Toyota, like I think they originated the 5 whys. Keep asking why 5 times and eventually you'll get there. And I think that's, again, often, isn't it? We need to go and build a cybersecurity platform. Why? Well, because we don't want to be breached. Why? And you kind of keep going. And I'm sure a lot of businesses do this, but I think that's something that I'd love to see more of. I think particularly in tech. I think tech becomes more the how and the what. But it should be much more around the why as well. So how did you know it was time to come out of the army?
I was lucky enough to get selected to go to Staff College, which was a ticket to probably 1 star ultimately. And which was great, and I was going well. But I got a piece of paper through the post that said, in 1 year's time, because they're very organised in the military, in 1 year's time you're going to go on a 2-year course, after which we will time bar you for 3 years. Now, not knowing back then that actually it wasn't worth the legal imposition wasn't worth the paper it was written on, but the fact was I looked at this bit of paper and said, if I sign this, I'm signing away the next 6 years of my life.
Yeah.
And I've got other stuff I want to do. And I did want to go into business and into the world of work, and I didn't really want to get married and have a family in the army, because there was so much separation at that time.
Yeah,
but it's probably even worse now.
Yeah,
and so all those things came together, and so that it was as simple as that.
It's a lot to ask of someone, isn't it? I think that's certainly always been my perception. For a young person going into the army, you're committing to a period of time.
Yeah.
Probably without really knowing what that future looks like, and you hear a lot about the military struggling with recruitment. And interestingly, I've seen in Australia, my son is going to turn 18 next year. We've been looking at his options, and they do offer a 1 year out of high school placement into the military in Australia.
Yeah.
Where they go off and they go to Wagga Wagga, I think, and they spend some time there doing almost like an apprenticeship, and at the end they can continue or they can come out and got some skills. And I thought that was a very clever recruitment strategy.
That's what I did. It was called a short service limited commission.
There you go.
9 to 12 months, and then you go to university, and then if you choose to stay on, they pay for you to go to university, and then you come back afterwards, and that's exactly how they got me.
Yeah, they go.
They got me for the longer term.
That's right. Well, because once you're kind of in, you start to figure it out and what it looks like, and you say the opportunities to study in university and so forth. I think a lot of people's perception, if you join the army, you're kind of in a green uniform, given a gun, and told to go and shoot bad people. There's a lot more to it than that. I also read an interesting article this week, because it's been we've had the Remembrance Sunday and so forth, and it was an article about the transferable skills of hiring a veteran,
right?
Which I found really interesting, and it spoke about grit, adaptability, attention to detail. There were sort of three things that popped out for me, and I was interested in what your thoughts were about the transferable skills of people coming out of the military.
Yeah, there's this piece that keeps on coming up around standards and reliability and dependability, but also the piece I spoke to a moment about, because the counter side of pushing responsibility down to the lowest level means that people take accountability naturally. It's just baked in. So that's, if I was hiring somebody for the military, that's what I'd be hiring. Somebody who's dependable, but also who takes initiative. Now, I remember just the great thing, saying to my sergeant or corporal, this needs to be done and this and this, and I go, done it. Like, I know. And it wasn't like a put down. It was just okay, I'm in your head. I knew you were going to ask me to do that, and I've already done it.
Okay.
So I think that's my take.
Yeah, great. And for yourself, coming out of the army, you then spent probably one of the most unusual career pivots I've ever seen, actually. But you then spent a year working with Jackie Stewart in Formula One.
Yes.
How on earth did that come about?
Well, Jackie he was best friends with the Princess Royal. They had both been male and female sports personality, BBC Sports Personality of the Year 1971, and they kind of and they were both elite sports people at the time, and so they just struck up a friendship.
Yes.
And so Jackie then spent quite a lot of time at Balmoral and Windsor and so on. And when I was working with them, we did a bit of that as well. And he became aware that his royal kind of the Princess Royal and the rest of the royal family would have a young officer with them who was called either an equerry or an aide de camp. And he said, I want one of them. And they said, well, sorry, you can't have one, but clearly you can't. But why don't you get a retired one? And so that's what happened. He found one, it wasn't me. But when the Formula One team was founded in 1997, Will very, very wisely said, I've had enough working with Jackie for the last couple of years. And I'd like to go and join the Formula One team. And Jackie said, you can do that as long as you as long as you backfill yourself. So he found me.
Right. So this is someone you knew that essentially introduced you.
Well, through the net. I never met him before, but through the network. And so that's how it came about.
So what did a day in the life of that job look like?
Oh God, I couldn't tell you what a day in the life looked like, because it was so different. When I went to every Grand Prix that year, but in between the Grand Prix there was all of the other work. I should say that the job I did was I was his what you might call him. If you ask me, I'd say chief of staff. If you ask Jackie, you might say bag carrier. I don't know. Although Jackie, he used to love the fact that after a race, because he's a man in a hurry, like all Formula One drivers, and after a race, particularly if our car went out slightly early, it's like, now we're going to get to the airfield to get out before everyone else gets out. And on occasion when we did finish, it was, how do we get out and be, and it would be like, there's Michael Schumacher's car, and how do we, and I used to go and recce routes through German forests and things, and then come out in front of them, and he used to love that. He still used to take the mick out of my driving, of course. Like, it wasn't smooth enough.
Yeah, of course. That's an impossible task, isn't it? To be driving with him in the car. What did being in Formula One teach you about team dynamics?
It comes back. It's very similar to what I was talking about in the military. It was a little like the race team was like an elite unit. It was really well organised. It's quite hierarchical, but the teams were very well organised, knew exactly what they wanted to do around each car, or around what they wanted to do. Again, high standard. And the other thing about setting standards in those kind of elite environments is that there's no recrimination when something goes wrong. Yeah, it's right. Let's stop. Right, let's learn. Go again. Yeah. So I think that's the main thing. I mean, there were two different organisations there, because there was the commercial team and there was the race team. Yeah. And the commercial team weren't quite the same. Just because they were people who come out of business rather than people who've been drilled. Well,
I also guess in the world of sport and racing in particular, seconds can make a difference.
Oh yeah,
particularly in a pit stop.
No, I did a pit stop once. Yeah,
you did. Yeah. What did you do? Were you sticking the fuel in, or the wheels?
Did the front wheel or something like that. I can't remember now.
How stressful was that?
Well, we were. To be honest, we were training. We weren't. I didn't do it in a race.
Yeah.
But it was. But we were under kind of race conditions, so it was fun.
I've read previously stories of Formula One teams going in to advise accident and emergency departments on how to be more efficient and how to organise themselves. I don't know if you've come across this. Yeah. It was one of them in London, I think, brought in one of the Formula One teams.
I think EasyJet also tried to get them to redesign how to fill and empty or board and disembark a plane efficiently, or more efficiently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because the whole Southwest Airlines business model in the US was about turning less time on the tarmac, more time in the sky. Mm-hmm. Planes essentially are losing money when they're sitting there not doing anything, and that was pretty much the only way to make a low budget airline make cash at that point. Mm-hmm. So a lot of lessons there. Following your time in F1. You've spent the majority of your career sort of since then, the last 20 odd years, where you've kind of worked in consulting, both your own business, Clarity Partners, as we kind of gave away, but you've also worked for Deloitte and you worked for HCI as well.
Yeah, they're now called Peak Global. I have to give them.
They've rebranded.
They rebranded, yeah.
But the majority of that consulting experience has been around the development of leaders or leadership teams. That's kind of been your thing for the last, say, 20 odd years. So what drew you to that area of focus in the first place?
Well, in the military, leadership is actually, particularly as an officer, leadership is your core activity. When you're not on operations, you're training for operations, and the role is leadership. And so, although we weren't full of models and theories, there was such a culture of leadership that I felt I knew a bit about it. Yeah. And that was reinforced. My first role after business school was in a professional services business that was and this is relevant, it was a network of FTSE 200 CIOs and public sector equivalents. Yeah. And I was hired to be the COO because I was a military bloke who could run a project and manage a program. Yeah. And we did various things. There was research, there were events, there were special interest groups, round tables, that kind of thing. But part of the portfolio was a leadership program, and so I did it, the senior leaders program, just to experience it. And at the end of which I went, hold on, I reckon I can do this. There's a bit of language, a bit of jargon, and a bit of approach which I respected. that was part of the language of business and of psychology, if you like, where that comes in, which we didn't use so much in the military. So I took myself off to get myself developed. Not in a kind of turbocharged way, but I then set myself to develop my leadership kind of capability, my leadership facilitation and design capability.
Yeah, okay. And sort of obviously through that you've set up your own business. Was that always on the bucket list for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we after we sold that business, me and one of the other guys, we set up a business in the southwest of UK, which interestingly was called Clarity Partners.
Yeah.
And my erstwhile colleague's still in the UK, and he's gone off and done other things, and said I could keep the title. But it's enjoyable being able to create your own script, as it were. But you have to make sure that you tap into. You have to work extra hard to tap into the learning, because a lot of learning happens at the water cooler or in the meeting, or if you're just unpacking something. And so and I'm not the only one in this. I'd like to say that I belong to an ecosystem of like-minded people. Some of them are businesses of 3 or 4 or 5 people. There was a company called Cultural Alchemy that I helped found 5 years ago as well. And so some of them sometimes come and work with me, vice versa. People from Peak, they still come and work for me. I still go and work for them sometimes. What that means is you can, between us, we're quite often convening opportunities or pooling resources to get to develop ourselves. So we got a guy called Trevor Bentley out from the UK who's the guru on Gestalt facilitation.
Interesting.
You were a psychologist when you said and so not just doing a bit of training, but trying to find the very best opportunities is important, and there's various other things I've done.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think a lot of people, when they kind of go out on their own, so to speak, to set up a business, it can feel quite lonely, quite isolated.
Absolutely, it does.
But you're right, just reflecting as you were talking, that some of the people that I've met over the last few years that have done their own thing have built that ecosystem, as you called it, or network of associated people where you can kind of pull each other along. Almost like a community to a certain degree of an offering. Because I think the other thing when you go out on your own is try not to do all things for all people.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to get diluted pretty quick, and people aren't really going to understand your value proposition. Whereas I think if you know what it is and you know that there's an adjacent thing and you can introduce those connections, it's probably quite valuable.
Absolutely. My specialisation is now working with tech execs. But in the coaching and coaching piece. But if somebody says, "Can you do some talent development?" I go, "Well, yes, I can," and I'm going to bring somebody in because I'm not going to wing it. There's no, because then like you say, it dilutes my brand, and why would I do that?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's probably again to me it's a lesson or a takeaway for people thinking about going out on your own. That's the wrong phrase. You're kind of going out into the world, right? And it's who can help you along on that journey and kind of be connected. And it's one of the things I've actually really enjoyed this year is connecting people. When I meet people and I can see a connection. I think I introduced you to someone recently because it felt like an obvious overlap, and I didn't know exactly what. But it felt like the two of you needed to have a conversation and figure that out for yourselves, really. And that's something I would encourage anyone thinking about making that move. Where's your ecosystem? Where's that network, and invest in it?
And you have to. I mean, I found getting off the plane without a job. Literally, my wife had already come back with the kids. And I was very lucky to land a role in with Deloitte, because it allowed me to build a network, but also just sniff the wind and understand what the business culture in Australia was like. Slightly different in South Australia, but I very, very quickly was spending more time in Melbourne and Sydney, and then I was ready to move out, particularly since the Big Four loved the idea of doing leadership. We're building very big leadership programs for Coles and ANZ and the likes, and it was great. It was really great. But I think the equity partners eventually went, hold on, where's the leverage? Because the leverage is where we get graduates to deliver it, and we've suddenly got to get these old gits with grey hair or no hair to deliver it, and they're too expensive, so we're not making as much money. So it became that, and that's why I left Deloitte. But I really valued my time there, really, really do.
Well, I think at any point in your career, having an association or working in a large global organisation or working in a major city for a big organisation is such a way to fast track your thinking, your career, your ideas.
Oh, yeah, exposed to bright people.
That's right. Just being around those kind of things, and I think that's something I always try and encourage in people. It doesn't matter how long it's for, but go and work somewhere where you're in an enormous pond of talent, because you're going to learn so much from people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was interested in. I saw you did an MBA as well.
Yeah.
Did you feel that you needed to go and sort of upskill yourself in that way to be relevant to business, or was there kind of a different kind of curiosity behind that?
No, totally the former.
Right. Yeah.
It was so. I left university, whatever I was, 23 odd. I left the army at 32. All of my friends who had just gone straight into business, I think one of them was CFO of W.H. Smith or something, but he was the exception. But they were all in strong middle to senior management, or headed for senior management roles. And there was I, again with a healthy dose of renewed imposter syndrome, because anyone in the military, certainly back then, thought, well, civvies know more than us. We're not commercial. What can we do?
Yeah.
Which is why I ended up in a kind of project management role at the beginning.
Yeah.
But so for me doing the MBA, well, there's two things. One is I'd met my wife at the Melbourne Grand Prix, and I was in England and she was in Australia, so I managed to get myself into the into Melbourne Business School without doing the, what was it called, the GMAT. I just wrote them a letter and they went, oh, we like the diversity of someone who's ex-military. So cool. I got in on lead to Melbourne Business School. Back in the day. I don't know if you could do that now. And I think if you were to ask me what I got out of it, the lessons that you learn, or your excellence and achievement in business or in the public sector, is about experience, and it's about mistakes and so on. But what the MBA allowed me to do was kind of gave me a seat at the table, and it allowed me to know what questions to ask whilst I was then getting that experience. So anyone who thinks that an MBA is a ticket to a specific type of job or salary, it's no, and employers don't look at it that way either. They go, well, that's nice to have. We know they're going to be thinking in a certain way. Right, now let's look at who they are and what they what they're capable of.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess when I was looking at this, I was thinking about you coming out the military and doing that MBA as well. It was a bit that kind of back to your imposter syndrome when you first rocked up in the army, right? As in, you feel like you need some kind of substance to feel confident in who you are. Although you probably knew most of that stuff and experienced it. It was just a way of shaping it.
Well, yeah, no, I don't know about that. Yeah, things like I wouldn't know what a regression analysis was. That's fair. I wouldn't know how to get a statistician in to help me understand a problem. I wouldn't even. Whereas doing the MBA, at least I knew to call them in. I knew roughly what to ask them. I mean, I was what in a famous book called Postcards from Hell about an MBA guy at Wharton or something. I was a poet. In other words, I was not that was his language for people who weren't very good at maths. Right. So we weren't very good at accounting, and we weren't very good at we called it trees. There's stats, but it gave us. But we were good at marketing. We were good at organisational development and all that. So people learnt off us a bit as well. Yeah,
interesting. I guess I'll get shortly to kind of the work you're doing and a bit more specifics. I guess I'm still kind of just to paint the picture of who you are and where you've come from. And our journey always sort of continues through our life, and events happen and things happen. And I know a few years ago, you had quite a disruption in your own personal life. The world was kind of going through COVID, but you were going through something a bit more serious than that personally. What was going on at that time for you?
So that was cancer. That was esophageal cancer.
Yeah.
I was very lucky that because COVID was going on, and I remember seeing the specialist who said, well, I can't do an endoscopy, which is because it was done because of COVID. but I am curious. And to his eternal credit, he sent me, David Walter, shout out, sent me to for a barium swallow, and then he phoned me back like that afternoon. I'm not worried about it. I'm even more curious. I can do an endoscopy, and
wow.
And so he did an endoscopy, and then came back after that, and in his very Australian way said, "I think we might be in a bit of trouble, mate." Yeah, and that was the way he broke it, which was quite nice actually, the way he did it. But anyway, long story short, so you know, I googled it. Esophageal cancer, 20% 5-year survival rate. And there was a time where I didn't know where I sat in that for about a week. I absolutely had accepted death. Yeah, right. And it's really interesting because I thought I'd be, you know, one would have thought that one would be, you know, terrified and all a quiver. But I was very pragmatic about it. Actually, I was just thinking, well, if I'm not going to be here, what about the people that I leave behind? And so. And when people go, "Oh, you were so brave," well, no, did I have a choice? You know, it's just you confront it, and a couple of lessons, I suppose, because I suspect that's what you're going to ask me. My list of important things has got a lot shorter.
Okay,
and my list of mundane things that should be important, that I should pay attention to, has got longer.
Yep.
So that's one thing, and I have to watch out because there are times when I can, where there are other people who still see a first world problem as a first world problem.
Okay.
You know, and so I have to be careful not to be too dismissive or push away. But the other thing is that mindset's really important, and this kind of comes back to leadership and the work that I did in leadership. You know, I would always say when I was coaching someone, so could you tell yourself a better story there? So, you know, the world is against me and blah blah. Well, yeah, but so let's flip it on its side. So this idea of telling yourself a better story, and the story I chose to tell myself was, you are not a piece of meat. You are part, because, you know, I was going from specialist to specialist to specialist, and it helped that Melissa, my wife, was had been an RN. She's a teacher now, but so she was able to ask good questions and speak in their language, which was really handy, and hold them to account a little bit. But they were all brilliant. So, you know, the story I told myself was that I wasn't this piece of meat, but I was a functioning member of my care team. In fact, possibly the most important one.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah.
And therefore, you know, I got as fit as I possibly could, and that helped me stay so positive. I never really looked back. You know, I never got too introspective. It was like, well, we've got this, and of course the care was great, and the prognosis got better and better.
Yeah.
But I really do think that it helped being able to do that, because you hear of people who have cancer who then kind of collapse, and some of it, you know, the surgeon said, actually, we agree that there's a spiritual side to this and a medical side to this, and they're both as important.
Yeah,
and that was the Western doctors were saying that.
Well, there's a big, I guess there's a big element of how we respond in a crisis, and you can tell, because all of my anecdotes start with, I was reading recently, by the way, but I was reading this recently, and it was about it was a plane crash, and there was 3 people in the plane crashes, and one of the guys sort of dusted himself off, right, I'm going to go and walk, we need to go, we're in the middle of bloody nowhere, I need to deal with this, and off he went. He walked and eventually saw lights, found the road, and they flew back, they got back, and the other guys in the plane crash were dead. But when they did the autopsy, they discovered that one of these guys only had bruising. There was nothing actually fundamental that had died. There was nothing fundamentally wrong with him, but he'd frozen in the situation and stayed at the crash site, despite the fact that there was food, water, shelter, the ability to probably survive for I think it was 10 or 11 days, but before they found them. But it was the guy that took the action, that had much more severe injuries, that did something and kept going with purpose, that actually survived that.
Absolutely. I do have to chuck in the story here, because Jackie Stewart had a lot of famous friends, and I won't drop names, but apart from one person who for 2 weeks in 1973 was the most famous person in the world, he's called Nando Parrado, who is a Uruguayan gentleman who was one of 2 people who walked out of the Andes after a plane crash So there's a film called Alive that's about it.
Uruguayan rugby team.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, it wasn't the national team. It was a college.
Like
team.
a kids, like a under 21.
Yeah, it was a college
yeah.
team, and they crashed in the Andes. And so I won't tell the story. Other than there's two things. I remember him saying when they tried to walk out, him and this other guy eventually got enough. They went in rugby boots up this mountain like this, and with their stock of food. Guess what that was? But they got to the top, and they'd been told by the pilot that they'd passed Curico, so that meant they were already in Chile. So they got to the top thinking, here will be the green fields of Chile. And when I got to the top, look over, and it was just snow.
Yeah.
Snow-packed peaks. And I met up with Nando for breakfast a few years ago, and in Adelaide, actually. And he said, at that point, I knew I was going to die, but I was going to die trying.
Yeah.
And it was just it still brings shivers now. And there was just something remarkable about him, and that exactly the same thing happened. And one of the guys back at the plane died the moment they picked up a signal on. They got the radio working for an hour or something, and it said that the search had been abandoned.
Yeah. And
one of the guys who had actually been the captain of the team, who was in the first third of the book, is the leader.
Yeah.
Gave up.
Yeah.
Or the implication is that he didn't have any injuries at all.
That's right.
I mean, they were getting hungry, and some of them weren't eating because they did. The principal didn't want to eat human flesh. But the strength of spirit is.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Underestimated. Yeah.
I was interested in what you described. What you went through there was a very stoic response. I would say, very kind of practical reality. This is the situation. Do you think that was maybe a reflection of your time in the military, in the sense that in conflict, there's a scenario where you may not see out the end of that day. You kind of got to confront that on a fairly regular basis. So was that kind of, do you think, naturally kind of inbuilt into your psychology, let's say, on a human level?
I couldn't say, but it was very natural to that was my reaction. Could be that I'm just an insensitive git. I don't know. That I'm just emotional. I'm going
to call it stoic. It's
but there is something about if things go wrong, the worst thing you could do in the military, and those are my formative days. The worst thing you could be accused of by the troops or by your peers was of flapping. Worst thing. You don't flap. We do not flap. We just, don't run. It'll alarm the troops, type thing. So there was always something there about just staying measured, because you're not going to achieve anything more by not being measured. So just taking the data, work out what's going to go on, and then once you got 30% of the information, go with your gut, type thing.
Yeah, look at that, and that probably does translate into the world of business as well, right? I think we've been through a pretty rough year economically. We went through that period of COVID where there was a lot of uncertainty and so forth, and it was about keeping your heads. For the teams you lead, for the businesses you run, for your customers, for your stakeholders. I think we see that in cybersecurity with businesses being hacked. You see CrowdStrike recently. There's a lot of, it's not quite life and death to the circumstances that you were facing, but I think it does translate through. It also got me thinking, I've seen this clip has done the rounds for a long, long time. It's Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
He's talking about the Navy SEALs, and he's talking about the dynamic when they go into combat. Would they rather go into combat with someone they trust or the most skillful soldier? Have you seen this?
No, but I suspect you said the former.
It's the person they trust. Yeah. That's right. Not the best sniper or the best shooter or the best, or technically the best soldier. They'd much rather go into battle with someone they trust.
Yeah. Have you heard that there was a similar study around who you'd have babysitting your child?
Yeah.
The 15-year-old next door who's grown up, who you've known forever, or the Northern nanny down the road from the agency.
Yes.
And it's the 15-year-old who
it's interesting. So, I've heard something similar. No, sorry, you're making my brain just explode. I was listening to something recently, and it was a question. It was who would you phone if you were in the worst situation you could possibly be? What's the first name that kind of comes to your mind? And it was talking about that kind of trust and dependability, and most people it's going to be their wife, their husband, their partner, or what's. let's go beyond that. Who's the next person you would phone? I remember, God, this is about almost 20 years ago, but being in a particular situation and needing some help. And there was one guy in my team that I worked with. It was quite a junior person actually at the time in that team. And it was him I phoned. And I said, I need some help. I've got a certain situation here and I need someone to look after my kids, but I need to go and take care of something. And he was there in a heartbeat. And it's probably no surprise that guy now owns and runs a really successful business. And if I'm not sure he'd be even listening to this, but he'll know who he is because he'll know what he did in that moment for me. But it's funny, your gut goes to someone. It comes straight to your mind, doesn't it, in those situations? Yeah.
No, I was just going to kind of say that we're, not to talk about now, but I lean to an extent on the neuroscience of leadership and the fact that the brain is wired for relationships.
Yep.
And so we get drawn to the people who we trust, and if you think back, that's why we formed tribes. We formed tribes. That's why we were always drawn to each other, and then the people that we trusted, the people we're drawn to most.
Well, it's also that interesting idea that humans are the only animals on the planet that have ever socialized, in the extent where we socialize for better outcomes. There's a reason why chimpanzees have not put a rocket on the moon. Humans have achieved that. And I love this metaphor I've heard or read somewhere, and it said, you'll never see two chimps walking along carrying a log together. Because it's just, they haven't evolved in that way, but humans have. And it's only actually through collaboration and socialization that we've achieved the absolute advancement compared to every other animal that's ever set foot on this planet.
Totally,
which is the wired for relationships that you're kind of referring to. So that's a nice segue. Let's talk about your work in kind of leaders and leadership teams. And you've worked with some amazing leaders and some companies around the world. Through the work you've done, you've done it for a long time, sort of 20 odd years. What leadership challenges do you think sort of transcend time and space? What's an ongoing issue from a leadership perspective? Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Ember, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.